All right, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to take this moment to introduce myself. My name is Carrie. I am the co-executive director of the Artists Guild with Katie Rainey. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I just wanted to give a huge shout out to my collaborator, Katie Rainey, who is incredible. We planned this event and we're so excited to share it with you. And she did all the marketing, the newsletters, the Eventbrite. So thank you for making all of that work, because I do not have the talent that you have, Katie. So thank you so much. We have over 100 people that signed up for this event. So it is very clear that this conversation needs to be had and that our community, our art community, is craving this conversation. So I hope that there's a lot of community building today, resources being shared, and long-lasting relationships after this. I also want to acknowledge that today we are connected online and that technology and internet is not accessible to everyone. In the United States, I'm aware that the land was taken away from Indigenous people, and I want to share a personal land acknowledgement. I'd like to celebrate and thank the Canarsie and Munsee Lenape people, that original caretakers of the land that I am zooming in from. And if you're curious about your own land acknowledgement, I'm going to drop a resource into the chat that I use. And you can type in your territory either from where you work or where you are actually living. I also want to spotlight our National Advisory Committee. We have a couple of members represented today, and they're going to be helping us as we navigate Zoom, taking notes, and also sharing about the Teaching Artists Guild. So first, I want to highlight Marissa and also Julio. It's going to take me a while to find you. Hi, Julio. So these are our two friends that are going to be in the Zoom, taking notes, taking down resources so that we can have a recap email sent out to anybody here and also available on our website. They are a part of our National Advisory Committee, so they volunteer their time. Marissa is part of our board. And so if you have any questions about what is the National Advisory Committee, and also maybe you want to get more involved within the Teaching Artists Guild, please feel free to message them, and you'll see them in the breakout rooms and also here during the panel. So thank you so much. All right. Now I think it's time for us to get started with our panel. So I would love to introduce another NAC member, Tamara Anderson, who is going to be our moderator for our panel. And she also has a little activity for us to do before we get started. So Tamara, I'm going to share my screen for the do now, and I'm going to hand you the virtual mic. Thank you so much for being here and for moderating this event.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to echo, thank you so much, Carrie and Katie, for all this planning. This has been great. I'm really excited about this. This conversation is really important. This conversation also we have been talking about it in TAG since 2021, actually. So really happy to see how this come to fruition. So really quickly, I want you to center yourself wherever you are in your Zoom space. If you're in your comfy chair, if you're on the couch, if you're, wherever you are, I want you to think about what's one thing that's bringing you joy or makes you smile right now. And I want you to think about that, and then we're going to take a few volunteers. It could be one word. I know for me, one thing that's bringing me joy or making me smile right now is a creativity. Creativity. I'm going to say that. Oh, wonderful. We got some hands up. Yes, yes. I love it when volunteers. So let's go Marissa, and then we'll go with Lenore.
Getting organized. I got a new planner today in the mail, and I am like, wow, Feels like the first day of school again, getting organized.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Lenore?
Well, well, I'm in the DC area, and the cherry blossoms are out, and they're so gorgeous, and they bring me a lot of peace and beauty. And
Mm,
um, and they're very fleeting, so they seem to be a metaphor for many things. But I truly love seeing them right now.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to actually take a moment, have some time to actually share. So hold on to that word, because we're going to, at the end, we're going to be able to share it out in the world, in the chat. So hold on to the word that, you know, that's bring you joy and makes you smile right now. So, of course, this conversation is so important, but I would like to open this up with a quote. It's a quote by Toni Morrison. It was an essay that she wrote actually in 2004, the day after the presidential election when George W. Bush got elected. She was feeling, she won't say depressed, her word, she was feeling despondent, like, what do I do during this time? And what do I do as an artist? And what she ended up writing is something that I use and think about, and I think this puts us in the place where we're going to be today. This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also crucial to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art. So what we saw in 2020 in response to murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery is the country responded in local, national, and global uprisings. It provided such a powerful visual commitment to racial justice. And this is not to say that we have not seen murders, I like to call them police and military style lynchings on the news, through cell phones, through videos being shared. But of course, 2020 was different because we were home on lockdown at the start of a pandemic. So everybody was watching, and everybody risked life and limb to hit the streets to make sure that our voices were heard and that we were saying enough is enough. So in the theater community, in that same year, there was a letter called Dear White American Theater, and we see you, White American Theater. And it laid out principles for building anti-racist theater systems. And this included everything from access to hiring more Black playwrights or more playwrights of color, making sure that there was a quality of life included when you do theater, when you do art. This idea the show must go on in the light of COVID was starting to pivot. It was a challenging, what we have known Broadway to be called the Great White Way. And then by the summer of 2021, there were nearly 40 anti-history laws either pending or being passed across the US continent. These laws included anything from legislation against trans students and the teaching of history centered on gender and LGBTQIA+ history. It also started to penalize teacher banned books, started to see this idea of we can't teach about enslavement, we could teach about this. We can't teach about that because it will make children feelings hurt. We started to really go down the rabbit hole in the social media verse of mothers or fathers screaming and crying at school board meetings. And we started to see just what fear looks like. And so during this same summer in 2021, Miko Lee, the former co-executive director of TAG, we started talking about can we have anti-racist conversations and workshops with teaching artists? Will these laws impact funding for the art? And what type of curriculum pieces are already there, whether it be Black Lives Matter School, whether it be Zinn Education Project? And even the bigger question is, how can teaching artists even begin to prepare to work with these new laws that are actually making creativity and education illegal? So this is where we are, and I would like to start off by introducing our panelists. So our first panelist, Ava Thomas, is the Director of Racial Educational Justice for the North Shore School District in Washington State, where she works to create the institutional conditions that are necessary for justice in education. She is currently a Doctorate of Education candidate in Educational Leadership at the University of Washington and has an MA in Cultural Studies and BA in Community Psychology from the University of Washington, Bothell. She is a Prentice Charney Fellow with the Zinn Education Project. Deborah Minkart is the Executive Director of Teaching for Change and co-director of the Zinn Education Project. She is co-editor of Beyond Heroes and Holidays, a practical guide to K-12 multicultural anti-racist education and staff development and putting the movement back into civil rights teaching, a resource guide for classroom communities. Sam is currently an organizer with BLM and School National. She joined the steering committee in 2019 and states collective value is her favorite of the 13 principles. She has been dedicated to her community throughout her professional career in the nonprofit sector. She focuses primarily on youth, families, reproductive justice, and supporting individuals who have experienced violence. As an advocate, she centers her efforts on those who are most marginalized, which has included youth in foster care, the Black community, disabled individuals, LGBTQIA+ youth and adults. She is devoted to creating accessible, inclusive, and uplifting environments collaboratively. And the organizations that are representing here, you'll learn more about them at Zinn Education Project and Black Lives Matter School, and of course, our host for today, Teaching Artists Guild. So, okay, let's get to the conversation. All right, so, I will sing these questions to you. So let's talk about, of course, my notes are all over the place. Wait one second, give me 2 seconds, 2 seconds to make it look like I'm super organized, which I am. Here it goes. So what does it mean to you to decolonize education or decolonize the curriculum? Let's go. You want this shot to go in order, or do you want to just unmute yourself freely? It's like, a few of us. We could just unmute yourself if you're ready to respond.
Okay, I can start.
Yes, Ava.
That's okay. All right, I will start. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for having us on this panel. For one, I want to start by talking about, Eve Tuck and Wayne Yang wrote a piece called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. And they're talking about in that piece how it's not some type of metaphoric idea about decolonization, but really it's tangible strategy in moving forward. Like when we talk about decolonization, we're not talking about the hypothetical, we're talking about tangible change and dismantling settler colonialism. And in that piece, they also talk about how we can contribute to social justice projects. And what that looks like is being unapologetic about our approaches. We don't always have to ask for permission. And no time in history have we gotten one step closer to justice or freedom by asking politely. We've always had to be unapologetic about it and build collectives of people to come across or across lines of solidarity to work towards that change. Also, Land Simpson wrote a piece called Land as Pedagogy. And that's really talking about like what materials are you using or teaching about in your classroom? And then it makes me think like, where are you bringing students, or what are aspects of the environment or the land that you're bringing to students, even if you're still inside the classroom walls? And then who are you bringing students to and to students? I really appreciated the land acknowledgement at the beginning, and we also have to recognize that that's just one step. We have to acknowledge the lands that we're on. We have to acknowledge the people who first inhabited these lands and recognize that they're still here and they're still thriving. And what does that mean to truly center not only them and their voices, but also their ideas and their knowledge systems within our classrooms? And then lastly, I just want to make the distinction between decolonizing and anti-racism, because they run parallel to each other and they're also two separate ideas. So decolonizing is about dismantling settler colonialism and working against genocide of people and land, and then also working towards Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous futures. And then anti-racism is about dismantling white supremacy, recognizing that anti-racism is inextricably linked to settler colonialism, because settler colonialism has always depended on the enslavement and profit of people and land. And so I just wanted to put those ideas out there.
No, thank you. Those are some wonderful definitions for us to work from. Sam, you want to go?
Yeah, as they were talking, or she was talking, I was thinking about the idea of mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors. And for me, that's what it is. So as I'm in a classroom, where do I see my culture, my community really mirrored back to me at all? Where do I have those opportunities to really see into others' lives in ways that are meaningful, not necessarily in ways that are really surface level? So what is it that I'm engaging with? And then sliding glass doors are those opportunities where I might see something that kind of mirrors me, but really is a look into the future of what could be. And oftentimes when we're thinking about what we're putting in front of individuals from an education standpoint, it's often the mainline things, which then means majority white, majority those who don't have a disability, majority people who are skinny. And so thinking about that really is, to me, veering from the norm, quote unquote, and thinking about how do we uplift the hundreds of ways that people create families, and how do we do that so that it's more than just seeing this one image of family, or more than just seeing in a children's book all the animals but none of the people, right? That for me is really what it is people being able to see themselves and it not be only white norms and heteronormative and fat phobic.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, and echo what both Ava and Sam said, and add that it's, I think a colonial system depends on education. And I think that's something that we often forget, that young people aren't born with these racist, greedy, selfish ideas. You know, if anyone's around young children, we are often reminded just about what generous, life-loving spirits they are, and that to believe in a system of scarcity, of hate, has to be taught over and over. And so there's actually one lesson that's at the Zinn Education Project site that Bill Bigelow wrote called The Color Line, and it looks at the colonial laws that were put into place to keep people of African descent, indigenous folks, white folks, poor white folks, to keep them apart. And when children learn that lesson, they go, oh, like this wasn't natural. Like it had to be taught. It had to be instituted with laws. And if it had to be instituted, then we can also unlearn it. And I think that's so a decolonizing the curriculum would mean a curriculum that helps young people see how the colonial ideas were institutionalized, and therefore how they can be undone. Rethinking Schools, one of their books in the introduction, it talks about schools being a place that children can either learn or unlearn their power.
Mm.
And I think that so a decolonized curriculum would help children learn what power going to what Sam's favorite principle collectively that they can have. So
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's so interesting because so we have the definition of what it means to really decolonize. What does it mean to be anti-racist? We have an image of sliding doors and mirrors. How do we see ourselves? And then we have this truth about children. How do they enter this world, right? How do they enter this space? And so something I think is it brings another question to bring kind of like really going even deeper in that is how do you even decolonize relationships or decolonize what has been taught before? Like I think a lot of times we sometimes start at the curriculum that is given to us without always providing the why. You know, we make this assumption that people enter into schools and understand all these systems are purposeful and they are racist and they are sexist. They are all these different things. When in our reality, it is a normal. It is created in a space to make people think this is what it is. So how do we begin to actually, one of my favorite interviews with Toni Morrison. It's gonna be a Toni Morrison day. I'm not gonna lie, she's in my spirit today. But one of the favorite interviews, she says, when you take your race away, who are you? What are you left with? Right? So how do we start? How do we start? What are some possible strategies, not just for teachers, but for families? Like, what are some strategies that this could be step 1 or 2 to start on this pathway?
I'm going to jump in first if that's okay. I think for me, one of the things I've learned is the reality of your social location and really learning what that means. So not just what is my race, but what is my culture? Something I often talk about is people will be like, oh, I'm this culture or that culture. That's true. You have your actual home, maybe your family of origin. But if you're walking down the street in New York, looks very different than walking down the street in Nebraska. There's still a culture of a community that we all are somehow giving into in different ways. And so it's being able to recognize what are the quote unquote norms that I just take for granted, and what are the ways that maybe when I think about my social location, I often say that I'm an African-American person, but my parents grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, barely post-segregation. So because of their upbringing, it changes how I think about not only my race, but how I think about school systems is so different than someone whose parents didn't deal with segregation in the same way. And being able to start peeling back those layers of I'm a dark-skinned person, I have this look or that look, I'm in this community or that community, and do that throughout time. Because who I was at 4, 5, 6 years old as an early adoptee versus who I am as a foster parent is still involved in those systems, but now I'm coming at it from a different lens. And I haven't sometimes taken the time to acknowledge that it is my lens rather than it is reality.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ava, I saw.
Yeah, I can add to the first thing that came to my mind was shifting power and really being critical about what power is and what power can do. You know, the education system is founded on white supremacy and settler colonialism and very top-down power structures that are, you know, if you're at the top of the org chart, or if you're the teacher in the classroom, or if you're the administrator in the school building, you should have the most power. But indigenous ways of knowing would tell us that it's not about having power over people, it's about generating collective power. And so what can that look like in the classroom? And it makes me think about, like, do students have opportunities to be the teachers? And not just teachers about, like, yes, their own identities and their own communities, but also teachers of the content in the classroom. and what can that look like for them to really feel like they are not only like cultural experts, but also content experts, and bringing in that creativity. And if something doesn't work for students, that they have the power and the agency to say that that doesn't work for them, and to assert what does work for them, and then for the teacher to listen to what that looks like. And so instead of having it be the teacher as the sole bearer of knowledge in the classroom, it's really this collective wealth of knowledge that gets generated. And to me, that also means centering a radical love. Like at the end of the day, justice is about a radical love of every single person, embracing each of our identities and who we are as human beings, and then as racialized, as gendered human beings, et cetera, and thinking about that intersectionality. But at the end of the day, are we centering love? Are we centering the value and humanity of our students? And are we breathing that into classroom environments and experiences?
Oh, thank you so much. And I also realize that love is the opposite of fear, right? It's the very opposite of, it's the polar opposite of what we're looking for. And I also want to make an announcement really quick. If you have questions, like as this conversation is going on and you have questions that you were like, oh, this brought a question to me, please jot it down. And so that, because we are going to take time to bring some questions in, and I'll let you know where the questions can actually go to. So well, let me ask you a question. Are Marissa and Jose, can they send questions to you? Like yes or no? Yes?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Feel free just to send a message in the chat. You can send it to me or any of the co-hosts and panelists. And we did get a question from a participant. Ava, can you just repeat the term of blank colonialism one more time, if that's possible?
When I talked about decolonization is not a metaphor?
Yes.
Okay, that was a piece by Tuck and Yang written in 2018, which you can Google and it pops right up for free.
Literally does, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Deborah, did you want to add to that?
Sure. Just one suggestion in terms of helping break down some of the traditional barriers. In Washington, D.C., where I'm based, we had a project with schools for the beginning of the year where we would work with parents in our school year starts in September. So we would work with parents in August to plan a walking tour to introduce teachers to the community where they were going to be teaching. Because as we know, so often now teachers don't live in the community where they're teaching. And that flipped the script, because usually at the beginning of the school year, it's teachers, administrators lecturing parents on what they need to know. And when the school year began with parents doing literally a getting out of the building and doing a walking tour of their community, where people lived, what was the history of the neighborhood, what were the local stores or local informal or formal leaders, then it put parents not just by saying that they should be respected, but it generated the respect for the knowledge that they had. And it also broke down some of the reservations that teachers, often had heard. Some of the things that they had quote unquote heard about the neighborhood where they're going to be teaching shifted once they got out into the community, and often usually stopped at a place to eat and sort of break bread and develop relationships there. And then because we have so many artists here, the other activity we've done in schools with teachers at the beginning of the year is to write poetry based on theirs, the poem like Where I'm From, or writing on a cutout of a shoe footprint, sort of in whose shoes am I walking. And when teachers write and share those poems, they often find connections with each other and gain strength from that, from the ancestors, from those stories that are in the room, that again overcome some of the negative sort of chatter that might exist otherwise. 2 suggestions.
No, that also leads us to the year-long, decade-long thing about connection. So one of the connections that is often tenuous is sometimes between K-12 traditional educators and teaching artists, or teaching artists and the traditional school space. How are they introduced to that space? How do they build community in that space? Especially how can I say this? I'll just say it, especially when art and music is seen as a prep, or it's seen as a break or a rest time, as far as opposed to being a continuation. I'm sure, and because I have worn both hats. I have been a middle school teacher and I have been a teaching artist in a school brought in. And sometimes because I wore both hats, I knew how to navigate the politics enough to make my space welcoming, right? But that is not always the case. And just like what you said, Deborah, about parents and families, this idea of breaking bread, eating with each other, you know, when you talked about radical love, that's connected to radical relationships and radical community, right? So how, with all of this information, all these materials, all these resources we have available to us, how can we start to break down these walls to build a welcoming community for teaching artists, while also providing steps for them to decolonize their work and constantly question their work through an anti-racist lens, a Black feminist lens? Like, how do we start to do that with our teaching artists in a K through 12 space, or even outside of that space? I know it was a lot in that question. I'm sorry. I asked you 3 questions in one. So you can pick one of those and you can answer them.
I can start. If that, okay.
Yes, Ava, I think you're gonna always go first. Go first. So let's just you
Okay.
always
I know Sam went first last time, so
right.
it's all good. So 2 things I'm thinking about. One thing is, well, coalition building can be a really great resource and tool. So are there any types of back channel communications or online like digital platforms that you can build amongst artists where you cross share, and then it's an opportunity to cross collaborate with each other? So, you know, you take your lesson ideas that you tried on in class, or some type of material or resource that you found, and you're able to dump it in there. You know, maybe you categorize based on grade band, some type of like art category, or however you want to organize it, but keep that like digital, it's essentially like a digital archive that you can build where you're able to engage in cross collaboration and cross sharing. And then that also makes you feel like you're not alone in this too. Like you can start to see, like, as you coalition build, just how many people are doing this, because education is super hard, just in general. Education and educators are also under attack right now, as we have been for a long time. And when we're able to build those coalitions, we're able to strengthen the work, even across and beyond like school district boundary lines, state boundary lines. Like, we're not alone in this. And so when we're able to cross share, it just strengthens our work. So that's one. And then also thinking about like the interiors that you can build within your school or within your district, or however you work, but what are the kind of interior channels that you can build where you're able to speak unapologetically and share without feeling like you have to put your armor on when you step out of that space? But what are those areas and spaces you can build that truly are centered around trust? Because trust is also a huge resource. So who do you trust, and who can you build those collaborations with?
Thank you. And the word trust really stuck out, and just coalition building. Yeah. And knowing where those coalitions exist, or even the need for coalition. Like, I think that's important too. The fact that, you know, do we need to build this new tribe of people? Yes, because education, as much as we don't realize it, it can be very isolatory, which is why they can attack us much easier, because they feel like we're alone. Yes. Anyone else, please?
I think it's 2 things that I saw. One is, I love, there's an org I work with back home. They did it's respect, and they did like skits and plays around bullying, but they had an advisory group. So anytime they made new material or just wanted a revamp, they would do it and then go, what do you think? What are we missing? And so staying in conversation with people who can help you see the pieces that you might not see, or who can point out the things that you might not think about, adding and subtracting. And so for me, that was an important part, because it wasn't just them going into schools and doing this, but they consistently got feedback from the teachers who attended it and from just people in the broader community. So asking beforehand rather than afterwards, and asking after, because the people in that room might have a different opinion than the other people. So being in communication. The other thing I think is being in constant communication. Oftentimes when people have someone come in, they have this one project, they're going to come in, do that project, and then leave. And that doesn't allow for real partnership. So, hey, this is my syllabus for the year. Where else could I add some things in? These are some of the projects I was thinking about. And not just outside. How am I connecting with the art teacher down the hall for my English lesson? We sometimes get so siloed in our departments that we don't even reach out. And how can we then really help young people understand something in all of these different classrooms that they're in? And then that's not only going to strengthen the education that they're receiving, but they're going to not minimize the importance of one subject over another, because all of them are interconnected.
And nothing to add. They covered it all. So, yeah.
Oh my God. So you talked about collectivity, extending things. Some of this has to do with budgeting, right? Like the value of a teaching artist being in this space, right? Some of it has to do with relationships and partnerships. Some of it has to do with internal value. How do we as individuals value art? All types of art. Are we consumers of art? Do we go see and participate in art, dance, music, visual art? How are we? Like, I find my background as an artist really informed a lot of my middle school teaching, like how I taught middle school and high school, and how I even teach higher ed. It's bringing music in, bringing those examples, not just reading plays, going to see them. Like I had a student in my intro acting class. We were doing Death of a Salesman, and she was like, "Oh, my friend is reading it in their English class, and she told me this play is horrible." I was like, "Okay." So we, did in class the way I do it in class, and the students were riveted because they acted it out. We were looking at different sections. We were analyzing the monologues and dream sequences, and she's like, "This play is amazing." And I was like, "So why do you think your friend hates it?" That is a question. Like, how was it presented to them? And she was like, "Oh, she was it was just given to her to read on her own and to fill out, to be prepared to talk about in class as a structure, right?" So I think we have time for 2 more questions. So what I would love to talk about too is what specific materials, we're going to talk more about that like in our breakout rooms, but what are some examples of the materials, either Zinn Education Project or Black Lives Matter School? And I can talk about like what the Teacher Artist Guild has. They have this huge resource page. What are some resources that can lend themselves to the very strategies you just proposed today?
I could jump in on this, and Ava and I are going to share some slides in our breakout group with examples where you can see how people have incorporated art in their lessons. And I think this is where artists working with teachers can also help amplify the strategies and the approaches, because as we know, young people love to be creative, and it's often the first thing that gets cut when there's budget cuts. But one of the examples is an approach that people are probably familiar with called blackout poetry, where people will be reading a text. And so this was the examples we have are with Matthew Delmont's book on African Americans during World War II. And the young people not only highlighted key words to create a poem from the introduction, they then had to create a piece of art to illustrate the poem they had just created. And so the results for that are relevant to a social studies class, to an English class, and to art. And it was, it gave young people a chance to be creative, and they'll remember a lot more of what they've read. We also have a lot of examples from elementary classrooms of where we have had visiting artists. We've had go-go artists We've had an artist that does linocut screen prints, and had young people sort of picked what they wanted to work with to make their screen prints. But I think it's helpful to look at strategies that then a teacher can start working in, and not have it as an extracurricular, but as directly incorporated with what they're learning.
I can just add just a little bit. Just going to the Zinn Ed Project website and going to the search bar and typing in like any topic or, you know, anything that you're interested in, just typing that into the search bar, you're going to have a list of helpful resources that pop up. So that's served me well, and served the teachers in my school district well, even in developing out our ethnic studies frameworks and high school course, and also too, like leveraging your student voice as an advocacy resource can be helpful too. So if there's considerations about budget and funding and things like that, like your voice is powerful 100%. And when school districts hear from multiple voices, it can oftentimes put a little bit more pressure to reconsider some budget and financial decisions. So one, reminding people in your networks that budgeting isn't just about dollar signs, but about values and putting money where your values are. So there's that. And then if you pose to your students just a simple question like, why is this art class important to you? And having them express that back through art, that you can take that to whoever you need to take that to. That's multiple voices in art form that are advocating for this art class or project or whatever you're doing. And then you can also float that same question to the families of the students in your class. So what's been the impact on your family or on your child of this art class? So you can really amplify that out as well. So just a couple helpful ideas.
I would just throw in one more thing. Art is throughout the whole building. And that for me is something that really shows this isn't something that just happens in this one room, in this one space. But when I walk down a hallway and I can see all the different ways that art's being incorporated in different classrooms, and whether that's self-portraits that people are drawing, whether that's poetry, even and depending on the school, sometimes they'll have like whatever that month's theme is. So it'll be like Women's History Month, and then they have all these different book covers. And how are we showcasing art everywhere so people can engage in it and broaden their idea of thinking art has to be in a museum, art has to be this level, versus art is constantly around us and being presented to us. We just don't always name it art.
Yes, yes. And we also at Black Lives Matter School, under the Year of Purpose for April, we have a lot of curriculum pieces still for Black radical art, Black radical artists. And TAG has this wonderful interactive front page. You go under resources, and if you go under sight and scene, like you can see articles and blogs. But also too, I know this question actually came up in our summer conference. How do you find the background information, the history, you know, what's happening with the Teach Truth movement, what's happening with these bills, and the new bill that just got proposed in Florida just 2 days ago, Bill 999, that's going to try to control DEI in public and private universities. And you know it's going to be signed. I mean, I would love to say something different, but it is. And so because of that, how can I find out about these things that are happening, right? How can I use this to inform if I'm coming in as a teaching artist and I'm doing African dance and I'm doing a specific type of dance from Botswana? Yes, teaching artists have a wealth of like historical information and data. So how can I share that with my host teacher, share it with the school, share it with the students, but also as a teacher, how can I find out those things? And a lot of those historical pieces, like Ava said, I swear Zinn Education Project is like a teacher personal encyclopedia page. Like you just type it in and magic pops up. And you're like, I'm a genius. Now I can read this and figure it out. Or I can find resources, right? So those are definitely some things happen. So let's take one last go round in the light of what we talked about, the 2020 uprising, what's happening in 2021, laws that are still happening, this state of fear, that we are in the country. How does that impact the importance of the presence of teaching artists in education right now?
I could jump in just to say that I think everybody here, I'm sure, is aware of this, that throughout history, artists have played two roles. One is to be messengers, to be truth tellers, and also to provide inspiration. That art, that music, you always hear people from the civil rights movement talking about that art wasn't, the song gave them strength, that they sang, to give them the strength in the face of the sheriffs, and the face of the resistance that they faced. And so I think by bringing arts into the schools, you're bringing arts in at a time when it couldn't be more crucial and more essential, really, for the future of this country. People say to protect democracy. I would argue we're still building a democracy. So, but it's to protect that endeavor to. And it really is at a dangerous tipping point where the right is trying to ban. Already instruction was very limited in terms of what, as we know from textbooks, from the curriculum, but there had been a growing movement, as Tamara said in the introduction, of people being committed to teaching outside the textbook, to being truth tellers. And they really need artists as allies, both to help young people get the courage to continue, and to learn from history about the role of art through murals, through poetry, through song, through all forms of expression, through theater. That's usually with with SNCC, people learn about the voting rights mobilization, but they often don't learn about the Free Southern Theater. So I think showing how the role of art throughout history is going to be important for young people to learn about the tools that they can gain today.
Yes. Thank you. Ava, please go. And then we're going to actually, I have one question from the audience to pose to.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna, Deborah, I appreciate you talking about the long histories of art, and just to remember the grander legacies that each of you are a part of is so beautiful, necessary, and important, because art is what has driven communities forward. It's what's brought communities together. It's what's brought youth together. It's how various communities have organized and mobilized forward to fight for change. And so just remembering who you are, really grounding yourself in your why, and just remembering that you're a part of these broader legacies that will continue to push forward for the futures that we deserve, but that our youth, our young people coming up to stand on our shoulders deserve. And just one thing I want to add too is we can be really intentional and strategic about the language that we're using. And so sometimes that looks like, they might tell you can't use a specific lesson in your class because it has to go through a formal process. Well, I'm not doing a lesson, I'm doing an activity, or I'm bringing in a guest speaker, or I'm having students create their own learning opportunities to teach each other. There's always been ways that we as educators have resisted and pushed forward. And so just hang on to that. Language is also power, and we can use that to our advantage.
Yes. And question from Bailey. What activities have you done, if anybody in this group has done with young ones to assist with the decolonizing arts education with BLM schools? I can actually give an activity. If somebody doesn't have an activity, if sometimes the group has an activity, please share. And I will keep my activity for the breakout room.
Well, just a quick one that I want to share. This was during BLM at School Week of Action, but it's something that I've continued forward. So I go and meet with small groups or even one-to-one elementary students who are Black. And, this is a school district where we have 2.5% Black students and a very small percentage of Black educators. And so I try to, seek out the spaces where I can connect with Black students. And this was a conversation that I had with an elementary student, and she was just sharing about her experiences. And I just kind of want to remind us, and it was a good reminder for me, that it can be the little things. So that conversation was about her experiences. And in order to build trust, I put out just blank paper and markers on the table and said, we can draw and, you know, color together as we're having this conversation and getting to know each other. And she was like, what color is your jacket? Is it this color? And she held up a pink color, and I was like, yes, it is. And then she was like, what's your name again? And she looked at my badge, and then I saw her like writing, and she was like, what color is the chair that you're sitting in? And so she started drawing the chair. What she was doing was drawing me sitting there talking to her. And so it just showed me how important representation is. And I know that it's way beyond representation that's important, but where are the opportunities where students can express themselves and where you can build trust through art? That's served as a tool for me. So it can be the little things, and even just in our interactions with students. Doesn't even need to be a formal lesson or activity.
I'll add one quick project we did with my youth advisory board. So it was across demographics. And we literally just made a giant white poster of what makes us feel powerful. And so we just wrote power in the middle and wrote all the different things that make us feel that way, because it's hard sometimes to remember those. And then we had that hanging up. So when people were feeling like things were getting harder, more difficult, they had something that they themselves wrote, but also that their peers wrote. So maybe I can't feel that for myself right now, but I can lean into my peer who also this helps them feel powerful. And then collectively, we can raise each other up.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're getting to the end of the panel, and we did have some more questions. Oh, somebody commented about my background. So my background is an example of how Black Lives Matter School every year since 2018, we ask student artists to submit artwork for a competition. And of course, we save the artwork. So this is one of the pieces from a student that is behind me. And try to like highlight that work, even if it's like you don't like quote unquote, win, blah, blah. We use the work on our websites and give acknowledgement that way to kind of uplift the fact that they took time to, to participate in the process. When we get into the panel, I would like for all of us in our breakout rooms, sometimes what has come up is how can we address the fears of new teachers have of being fired, isolated, ostracized for bringing up activist content, and strategies for, I love this, courage building and allyship within school community. Or like Bettina Love, finding your co-conspirators, because she's always like, the allies know all the definitions and the terms and the books better than you. So you want to have somebody who's going to stand in the trenches with you, which is kind of a different definition sometimes. So I'd like to thank all the panelists. This discussion has been amazing. It's been important. This is an important start. I'm so excited. Let me just say, let me take a minute before we go on break. I'm so excited this is happening, because for those people that don't know me, I wear multiple hats. And sometimes I find myself splitting myself like a grate to be one person in one space and to be another person in another space. But when I'm in spaces like this, I get to be my whole self. And that is always so warm and so welcoming. And I just love it.